The IDF has launched a sweep in Jenin, dubbed Operation Iron Wall, in which special units are participating to push back against the rising tide of violence in the terrorist stronghold in Judea and Samaria. In Israel, they identify the Iranian effort through Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad to stir up disorder and chaos in the area with violent attacks and riots while establishing infrastructures aiming to challenge the IDF with attacks throughout Judea and Samaria. The goals of the operation are to maintain the IDF's freedom of action, destroy terror infrastructures, and neutralize immediate threats. Meanwhile, discussions have begun on the second stage of the hostage deal with Hamas, and an emerging clause might torpedo this phase. Speaking of ceasefire deals, under the ceasefire agreement with Hezbollah, the IDF must complete its withdrawal from southern Lebanon by this coming Sunday. And Western diplomats say the Lebanese army has already carried out 100 neutralization operations against Hezbollah infrastructure, while admitting it's likely that some of the requests came from the IDF. In a related story, Syria's new government has sent a message to Israel that they will not allow Iran to smuggle weapons through their territory to Hezbollah in Lebanon. And speaking of Hezbollah, a senior official makes a stunning confession saying, "We did not correctly assess Israel's power." On the same day, another senior Hezbollah official was shot to death a moment after leaving his home by an unidentified team of assassins. Meanwhile, in the Gaza Strip, the IDF Arabic spokesperson clarified to Gazan residents, if Hamas abides by the agreement, you can return to the northern Gaza Strip. In a related story, Russia's ambassador to Israel announced that hostage Sasha Trupnov is expected to be released alive. His condition is satisfactory, but not positive. And speaking of great power politics, the vision of the new Trump administration in the United States for Israel and the Middle East is coming into view, including a possible war with Iran, hopefully peace with Saudi Arabia, and the toppling of Hamas in the Gaza Strip. And finally, there was a terror attack in the heart of Tel Aviv in Israel on Tuesday. The terrorist, who was born in Morocco and holds American residency, entered Israel on a tourist visa, but he wasn't here to hang out by the beach, because on Tuesday he stabbed 4 people before being shot dead by off-duty Israeli security personnel. We have a lot to talk about today, so let's dive into the details. I'm Yair Pinto, and this is your Boots on the Ground report about what is happening in Israel on day 474 of the war with Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, the Shiite militias in Iraq, and now we must add criminal gangs and terrorist groups in Judea and Samaria, all acting under the control of the Revolutionary Guards Corps in Iran, which is the head of the axis of evil in the Middle East. A moment before we begin, I want to invite you to subscribe to TBN Israel on YouTube to receive daily Boots on the Ground reports from Israel. Our vision at TBN Israel is to share the truth and encourage you to unite in prayer for the peace of Jerusalem. The IDF, Shin Bet, and Border Police launched Operation Iron Wall on Tuesday to push back a rising tide of terrorism and lawlessness in the West Bank Palestinian village of Jenin. The Air Force carried out a preliminary strike, after which IDF special units raided the Jenin refugee camp, considered the Hamas stronghold in northern Samaria. The IDF forces caught terrorists off guard by beginning the operation in broad daylight, just about midday, when the streets in Jenin were bustling. Eyewitnesses' reports indicate that parallel to the operation's start at the camp, Israeli military reinforcements were observed moving from the El Jalama checkpoint towards the city. It was also reported that the Palestinian Authority's security forces are withdrawing from the area after several days of trying to get control of the streets, which ended in failure. We have to give them credit for trying, but in the end, they didn't have the capacity to finish the job. Just yesterday, Mati Shoshani and I were at the Gush Etzion Junction in Judea and Samaria, bringing you boots-on-the-ground coverage of the deteriorating security situation in the area. While we were in the middle of filming for you, the IDF began the operation, and the Hamas terrorist organization released an official statement saying, "We call on the masses of our people in the West Bank and its rebellious youth to enlist and escalate the confrontation with the occupation army at every point of contact with it, and to act to confuse it and thwart the wide-ranging Zionist aggression against the city of Jenin and its refugee camp." In other words, they want a general uprising, which I'm happy to be able to tell you didn't happen. It also needs to be pointed out that the IDF only acted in Jenin after the Palestinian Authority police spent most of the last month trying to get control there. Like I said before, you have to give credit for trying, but the Iranians have built up the terrorist groups and criminal gangs there to a point where the Palestinian Authority police couldn't overcome them. Now, it's the IDF's turn to try and confront these Iranian-backed groups, and they are taking no chances. Elite units, including the Kfir Brigade, Egoz fighters, Duvdevan, as well as border police forces and large operational units of the Shin Bet have been deployed for this operation. The IDF statement said that the operation will continue as long as required. However, there are clear objectives to continue preserving the IDF's freedom of action throughout Judea and Samaria, to destroy and neutralize terror infrastructures and ticking bombs. The timing of Operation Iron Wall in Jenin is not coincidental, as the IDF has been planning a major operation inside the Jenin refugee camp for some time now in order to prevent and deter violence such as last week's attack in the village of Funduk, where 2 women and a policeman were murdered and several bystanders were wounded, as well as attacks along the seam line and even inside Israeli territory. But now there is a new element that accelerated the decision to launch a large-scale action: the hostage agreement and the release of hundreds of terrorists in the coming weeks to the West Bank. The IDF understands that such a massive release of security prisoners will stir up terror operations on the ground and increase their motivation to carry out attacks. Some of the released may immediately return to their old circle of friends and activities, either by perpetrating attacks or by planning and dispatching attackers. For instance, Zakaria Zubeidi, a notable figure expected to be released as part of this current ceasefire deal, is considered a charismatic figure who wields influence in the Jenin refugee camp. During the Second Intifada, he established the Fatah brigades and was behind serious attacks. He is a local hero who manages to inspire the population and encourage it to act on behalf of terrorist organizations. The defense establishment warns that his release could steer the region and increase terror activity. The IDF is therefore focusing on significantly damaging the capabilities of the terrorist organizations in northern Samaria, while trying to prevent their growth by striking manpower, weaponry, and terror infrastructure. And now, let's move on to what's happening in our neighborhood, the Middle East, with TBN Israel's senior Middle East analyst, Mati Shoshani.
With President Donald Trump back in the White House, his administration signals a decisive shift in UN foreign policy. The previous Trump administration was known to have been strongly pro-Israel, and at the same time, incredibly fast-moving in the application of foreign policy, and specifically when it came to the Middle East. Let's break this down. First and foremost, the U.S. is on the move to do something big and something quick in the Middle East. They were behind this latest deal between Hamas and Israel. Trump himself and several of his aides were personally involved in ensuring that the deal went through quickly, but more so, we're back to discussing how Saudi Arabia is going to be a future aid or possible partner in what was known as the Abraham Accords. Let me remind everyone that the U.S. administration under Donald Trump did more in 4 years than most diplomats can hope to do in an entire lifetime. Between moving the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, recognizing the Golan Heights and Israel's stake in the Golan Heights, Jerusalem as its capital, and the Abraham Accords, those in themselves are things that other countries and other U.S. administrations were unable to do for decades beforehand. Well, we can only expect that Trump will be giving even more than that. But, and here's a big but in this situation, the Trump administration is known to push deals rather than just aid for warfare. So instead of possibly more aid for warfare, weapons, munitions to the Israeli army, they might push a regional deal, like we mentioned, with the Saudis or possibly with the Palestinians, Hamas, or otherwise. There's another problem. This war for the state of Israel is a bit tricky. We need to develop a whole lot of new weapon systems, and we've done so rapidly during the war. And that has come at a very high price, financially, manpower-wise, long-term planning-wise, on many, many levels. It's been painful and expensive. And the U.S. aid that we receive, both during the war and in general, throughout the years, is aid that we need to spend within the U.S. itself. It bolsters, it strengthens the U.S. economy, but it doesn't necessarily help pay the bills locally in Israel. And one last big thing about the Trump administration is that when you move fast, sometimes unexpected events take place. And that might be the case here. We know the evil that we know currently, but we don't know what shooting from the hip might look like under the Trump administration and how it might bring into the picture new proxies in this region that we didn't previously expect. Just here's one example of something we're not expecting. We know what the Houthis are doing right now, but we don't know what they might do if the U.S. destabilizes Iran further than what it currently is at. With the Trump administration back in the White House, things are going to change. Within days of retaking office, Trump reinstated his maximum pressure campaign, targeting Iran's oil exports. This aggressive approach is expected to cut revenue to the Iranian government by $30 billion annually, further destabilizing Iran's already weakened economy. So Tehran faces growing unrest, economic collapse, and internal divisions, with protests intensifying and hardliners within the country resisting reform. The Iranian regime must weigh the cost of its actions very carefully. Trump's alignment with Israel reinforces the pressure, but raises the risk of regional escalation even further when it comes to the Iranian Revolutionary Islamic government. And then there's another question here. Can this region be even further destabilized compared to what it is now? Because you might say to yourself, well, between Hamas, between Hezbollah, between the Syrian regime being toppled within a week, what more can happen in this region? All it takes to almost completely stop global trade is for the Houthis or the Iranians through the IRGC to slow down global trade through the Arabian Sea or the Red Sea to the point that it could affect global trade costs. That in itself will put a cost on the pockets of people throughout the Western world, or throughout the world altogether. There's more to that. Aside from that, they might find new proxies that we haven't even thought about. Maybe pirates in a country on the eastern coast of Africa. Who knows what they would come up with next? The U.S. is at war or at conflict with the Chinese. And the Chinese are trade allies of the Iranians. In fact, they get much of their crude oil from the Iranian people. So if the U.S. slows down the Iranian economy and prevents them from exporting oil, that slows down the Chinese economy, and that in turn makes things even more tense between the U.S. and China. And of course, Israel is in the middle of all of that. We have relationships with both countries, and that in turn makes things more complicated than what previously was expected to be possible. So that's enough doom and gloom for this moment. Let's focus on some positive news coming to Israel. The ceasefire agreements, both with Hezbollah and of course with Hamas, signal hope for Israel's recovery as major airlines and businesses finally resume their operations in and out of Israel. Just the other day, Air France and British Airways are re-establishing their flights, a testament to improving stability in the region and the perception of stability, which is just as important. And however, the challenge remains to sustain peace long enough to fully restore the global confidence in our economy and in our military might and power projection in this region. Let's remind you that Israel is an island economy. Without flights in and out of the country, without flow of trade in and out of the country, our economy comes to a complete stop. And we need people to know that it is once again safe to travel in and out of Israel, something that's exemplified by the fact that big airlines are once again renewing their flights in and out of the country. On a personal note, I want to know that I'm expecting to see you guys back in the country. We want to see the tourists, we want to see the business partners, we want to see the people fill the streets of Jerusalem and the cities of Israel once more as they did in the past. We can't wait to see everyone come back to Israel. So let's switch gears to think about the next day for the people of Gaza. It's estimated that up to 60% of the Gaza Strip lies in ruins right now after the IDF's operations and Hamas hostility within that region. And as international aid starts to flow in, the question comes up, will Hamas prioritize reconstruction or return to militarization? For Israel, ensuring that aid reaches civilians and not Hamas's military wing is a strategic and moral priority. The global community must step in with strict oversight to rebuild Gaza without empowering militancy again in the Gaza Strip. And there's one more thing here, Israel's position. Israel wants to make sure that the aid is distributed. Israel wants to make sure that the people of Gaza are in a better condition, but we want to make sure that we are not the ones who are personally, with boots on the ground, pun intended of course, are the ones giving out the aid. That's not something we're interested in, and it's not something we need. We need to make sure that there's an entity within the Gaza Strip who can distribute the aid. So let's wrap this up. There's a whole lot of both good and bad happening at the moment. The Middle East is on the brink of transformation, with Israel at the center of shifting alliances and policies. Trump's return to power reshapes U.S. and Israel relations, bringing both opportunities and constraints. And meanwhile, Iran faces unprecedented challenges, with protest and economic collapse threatening its stability. For Israel, the decision made now will define its regional standing for decades to come. Can it leverage U.S. support while preserving its autonomy? Will international aid rebuild Gaza or fuel more conflict? And how will Israel navigate the growing tensions with the Iranian Islamic nation? As we reflect on these pivotal moments, I'm Mati Shoshani reminding you to stay informed, and now back to Yair Pinto.
Thank you, Mati Shoshani. Here at TBN Israel, we'll continue to report on what's happening in the Middle East. And we'll start right now by turning our attention to the northern border with Hezbollah in Lebanon. A moment before we dive in, I want to invite you to once again click that subscribe button if you haven't already, so that you'll be tuned to the truth and never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. We, at least the general public, will probably never know exactly what happened on Tuesday in the Lebanese village of Mashgara, where Muhammad Hamdi, a senior Hezbollah official, was shot dead in his own front yard by unidentified assailants. Was it the result of an internal Hezbollah turf war? Was it the work of one of Hezbollah's domestic opponents within Lebanon? Was it some other foreign intelligence service? Or was it a Mossad operation? The last possibility is the one that most people will assume is true, but the Mossad will neither confirm nor deny it. So once again, we'll never know for sure. However, there are reliable reports of growing internal tensions within Hezbollah alongside the organization's declining ability to deal with external threats, including Israel. And in any case, this adds to the internal and external pressure on Hezbollah. Under the ceasefire agreement, the IDF is obligated to complete its withdrawal from southern Lebanon by January 26th, in parallel with the deployment of 6,000 Lebanese National Army soldiers in the country's south. So far, the Lebanese army has carried out over 100 operations to neutralize Hezbollah infrastructure, including destroying rocket launchers and buildings, some at the request of the American ceasefire mechanism. Meanwhile, the new regime in Syria has committed to preventing Iran and Hezbollah from renewing arms smuggling to Lebanon, opening a diplomatic window of opportunity to alter the regional balance. However, Western diplomats warn that the successes of the process depends on political will and the cooperation of all parties, with Hezbollah's infrastructure still posing a potential threat. That's all for the Northern Front reports. Now, let's shift our focus to the Gaza Strip and the most recent developments. IDF Arabic spokesperson Colonel Avichai Aderi posted a message to Gaza's residents this week telling them to avoid approaching IDF forces in the area. Approaching the forces endangers you. The statement also clarified that if Hamas adheres to all articles of the agreement, starting from the beginning of next week, Gaza residents will be allowed to return to northern Gaza. While we're on the subject of hostages, discussions have started on the decisive stage of the hostage deal. Mossad and Shin Bet leaders returned from a secret visit to Cairo this week where they discussed the second stage of the hostage deal. The focus of the discussion was Israel's withdrawal from the Philadelphia corridor, a critical point that threatens to torpedo the deal. Security sources have emphasized the strategic importance of retaining control over the route, while talks with Egypt aim to arrange security oversight at the Rafah crossing and throughout the area. Meanwhile, the Qatari Foreign Ministry spokesperson voiced optimism about the second phase, which will include prisoner swaps and increased population movement in Gaza. However, United States President Donald Trump has expressed his doubts that the current ceasefire will last or that the agreements will all be met. Back in Israel, Prime Minister Netanyahu clarified that Israel does not intend to withdraw from the Philadelphia corridor and that any future move will be carried out with international guarantees. Decisions regarding the route are a critical stage that will affect not only the successes of the deal, but also the region's overall stability. Here at TBN Israel, we will continue to update you on every development in the Gaza Strip. Next, we have a shocking story about the terrorist attack in Tel Aviv on Tuesday. Before we tell you about that, I want to invite you to once again click on the subscribe button if you haven't already, because we really need your help to get the truth about what's happening in Israel out to the world. And if you want to financially support our work, please click the donate button on YouTube or go to our website www.tbnisrael.com/give. The stabbing attack occurred Tuesday evening on the Halat Binyamin Street in Tel Aviv, with a terrorist approaching a small group of people, pulling out a knife and attacking them. He wounded 2 people in that initial attack before running to another location and attacking another group of people, again managing to wound 2 of them. 3 soldiers who were in the nearby building heard some of the victims screaming for help and quickly drew their pistols, ran towards the sound of the attack, and neutralized the terrorist. The police arrived in force moments later and conducted a search of the area to make sure there were no other accomplices or additional threats. An initial investigation indicated that the stabber, Kadi Abed El Aziz, is a tourist born in Morocco who also holds an American residency. According to suspicion, he entered Israel at the start of the week on an ordinary tourist visa. Furthermore, it has come to light that the border inspections at the Ben Gurion airport sought to prevent his entry into the country, but security personnel approved it. An investigation of this incident has been launched, and I feel sorry for the people who made this mistake who are about to be unemployed. But I also hope the appropriate lessons will be learned and the mistakes won't be made again. I want to call on you to continue spreading the truth, share and follow us, and most importantly, continue praying for Israel. Pray for our hostages who are held in Gaza by Hamas. Pray that they return safely to their families. Continue praying for the IDF soldiers wherever they are, in the Gaza Strip, in Lebanon, in Syria, or in Judea and Samaria. Pray for the peace of the people of Israel and all the innocent lives that are affected in this region by these terrorist organizations. And most importantly, don't forget to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. This is a spiritual war. And how do we fight a spiritual war? we pray.
Hello, this is Mati here in Jerusalem with TBN Israel.
This is Yair Pinto from TBN Israel here in Jerusalem. TBN Israel is keeping viewers informed with Israel-focused news, culture, and what God is doing in this land.
Support TBN Israel today online at tbn.org/Israel. Thank you.